Today, we're going to take a look at making this very small engine. This is 0.1 cc's displacement, that's 1/10 of a cc. This engine was designed by Richard Gordon in the early 90s, and it was published in the magazine Model Engineer in the UK as a build article. This is a two-stroke engine, and it uses compression ignition, no glow plugs or spark plugs or anything. It's kind of similar to a diesel, though not exactly the same. The construction of this engine is quite simple. The only real challenge is the size of the parts. Being so small, the fit of all the parts to each other is very critical in getting a small engine like this to run. There's really no room for sloppy work on an engine like this. Well, that's enough computer stuff. Let's get out into the shop. The first part we're going to make is the crankcase. This is one of those parts that when you look at it seems really complex, but if you break it down into all its individual steps, it goes pretty quick. It's actually pretty straightforward to make. I made up a threaded arbor so we can hold it to finish the front of the crankcase. Now in the milling machine, this hole is where the carburetor will fit into. Well, if we got somewhere to put the carburetor, I guess we better make it. This internal curve on the velocity stack was a good place to break out my graver and do a little bit of hand turning. The carburetor's finished. It's just held into the crankcase with a spot of Loctite. Back on that threaded arbor, we can drill the main crankshaft bearing. We had to wait to do this until after the carburetor was in. There's just a few more operations left on the milling machine. And here's the finished crankcase. I filed the bottom round off camera just to save you a little bit of tedium. The piston and counter piston are made from hard cast iron. This little piece will be enough for both of them. Here's the piston all finished off. And I made the counter piston pretty much the same way. The cylinder is made from the same type of cast iron as the piston is. Even though I've done it more times than I could ever count, single point threading is still super satisfying. This setup in the milling machine is using a custom cutter that I made to cut the exhaust ports. And this here is the transfer ports. And that's all there is to the cylinder. I used some oilstone powder to give it a quick hone to fit the piston. The connecting rod is made from 6061 aluminum. I used the milling machine to cut it roughly to shape. Then I made up some filing buttons and got to work with a handful of files. And here it is finished. The crankshaft is made from 1144 stress-proof steel. This steel is pretty tough and it machines really nicely. It works good for crankshafts. I'm using an offset bushing to turn the crank pin. This makes for a very strong crankshaft. The alternative would be to drill a hole and press a pin in. But that interface is a weak point. And especially on a small engine like this that runs really fast, we need just about the strongest crankshaft we can manage. Here it is finished, and I might have forgotten to start the camera recording when I drilled the intake ports. Whoops. We've got most of the difficult work behind us now, so it should be pretty smooth sailing through to the end. The cylinder head is a simple part made from 6061 aluminum. And here it is after anodizing. Now we're going to go ahead and make the back plate. This part covers up the back end of the crankcase. These two slots will let us use a spanner wrench to tighten it. To hold it to finish the other side, I'm going to use a super glue arbor. And that's exactly what it sounds like. We'll just glue it on here, and I'm going to go have lunch. When I come back, it'll be stuck on there well enough we can machine the other side of it. And here's the finished product. You just soak it in acetone overnight and it dissolves the glue, and then the part falls right off. Now we can make the fuel jet. I just made this guy from a piece of 1/8 inch hex brass that I had. And of course I didn't have the right size drill bit, so I had to file one up real quick. That drill is about 16 thousandths of an inch in diameter. That's about the thickness of 4 or 5 pieces of paper, or about half of a credit card thick. Here's the fuel jet finished. Well, hey, if you like my videos, consider supporting me on Patreon. Patrons get access to ad-free videos and a patron-only Discord. Anyway, there's a link in the description. Next up, we can make the needle valve. This will control the amount of fuel going into the engine. This fine point will fit into the fuel jet, and by screwing it in or out, it will vary how much fuel can flow through the jet. Here it is finished. It's hard to get a good shot of just how fine that needle is. We're just about done now. There's only 2 parts left. Just the propeller driver and the nut to hold the propeller on. Here they are after anodizing. I'm not sure why, but I couldn't get these to take anodize very well. They must be some funny alloy. We've got all the parts made now, so it's time for the best part. We get to put it together. The wrist pin is a press fit in one side of the piston. This is so it doesn't slide out and get into the ports. I use my jeweling press to set it to just the right depth. A good helping of oil is always important when you're putting these things together. The connecting rod just barely has enough room to sneak and get onto the crank pin. The piston is a very slight interference fit with the cylinder. This way it can run itself into just the perfect fit. The compression adjuster screw is just a simple turned part with a cross pin in it with some Loctite. I wound up a small spring to put on the needle valve. This is so it doesn't move around while the engine's running. Well, it's all together. There it is. Little tiny model airplane engine. Well, let's take them outside and put them on the test stand, see if they'll run. The fuel mixture I'm using is 37% ether, 25% castor oil, and the balance kerosene. Unfortunately, I didn't really have any success with this fuel. While I was trying to run it, it was about 90 degrees Fahrenheit outside, and I think what was happening is as soon as the fuel touches the fuel tank, all of the ether boils out. Now on these small compression ignition engines, the ether is extremely critical to get it to run. So without having any ether in the fuel, it basically won't run. What you're seeing here is the best I ever got it to run. But don't click off the video just yet, we're not done. This is a glow plug. And if you watched my last video series, you probably know where this is headed. A glow plug is used with a methanol-based fuel, and the element in there is an alloy of platinum and iridium. The methanol in the fuel reacts with that element, and it keeps it glowing screaming lava hot while the engine's running. And that's how it ignites the fuel. Now this glow plug is way too big to fit in this engine. There's no way it would ever run with this one. So this is a Cox engine. This is their smallest engine they ever made. And what they did to solve the glow plug size problem is they just made the whole cylinder head the glow plug. You can see it's got the same element in there, it's just a whole lot smaller. Well, I've got a machine shop, so I figure I could modify one of those to work on our engine. I've got this one here that I modified for a different engine years ago, and I figured rather than sacrifice a brand new one, let's try this one out, see how it works. We'll still have to change a few things though, so let's go ahead and go do that. Oh, and if you're wondering about those marks there, the confounded wrench slipped when I was taking it apart. So I guess we don't have to feel too bad about modifying it. I'll just make this a press fit into the cylinder head. This will pretty much just replace the counter piston. We have to open up some clearance in the cylinder head so that the glow plug can fit through. And here's the glow plug. There really wasn't much to do because that one was already partially modified. And here's the cylinder head. I polished up the top a little bit so you can't see the marks. I was going to re-anodize it, but I think this actually kind of looks pretty cool. I think I'll leave it like this. The fuel we're going to use is 20% nitromethane, about 25% castor oil, and the balance methanol. The compression feels a little bit low, but let's go give it a shot. The compression seemed a little low, so I increased it slightly. Well, as it turns out, that's all the better I ever got it to run. There's a few things that I'm not too crazy about with the design of this engine. The first of those, and probably the most important, is the way the carburetor is attached. There just isn't enough surface area for the Loctite to hold on very well. And any leakage here causes a significant loss in crankcase compression, with the subsequent loss of transfer efficiency. The second is the transfer port arrangement. They have a very roundabout path from the crankcase up into the cylinder. So I think I'm going to sit down and have a think about this engine and see what I can come up with. I've got a few ideas for how we can do this a little better, and I think we can go a little bit smaller too, so keep an eye open for that in a future video. Well, I hope you enjoyed watching this video as much as I enjoyed making it. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. But that's all for this one, so I'll see you next time.
Oh, wow, that's